At Team Toyota, they've been selling and servicing new and used Toyotas in your community for over 50 years. And you can reserve your next new Toyota with them today. You'll get a realistic timeline, and even in this crazy market, they won't charge you over MSRP. Or don't wait at all. With over 75 certified Toyotas, including a bunch of RAV4 and Highlanders, you can drive one home today. And you can always trust them to maintain your current vehicle. Their service and collision centers are high-tech, comfortable, and will save you time and money. Team Toyota can help you go anywhere you want, but they'll always be your hometown team. Just visit teamtoyota.net and choose from 3 locations in Langhorne, Glen Mills, or Princeton. Hey folks, thanks for listening to the Phillies Talk podcast presented by Team Toyota. I'm Corey Seidman. He's Jim Salisbury, and it is Monday, October 3rd. We're sitting here as the Phillies are set to begin their final series of the regular season against the Houston Astros with the magic number all the way down to 1 for the Phillies to make the playoffs for the first time since 2011. Coming off just a crazy weekend in Washington, a weekend that felt like it was a month long between all the rain, the potential postponements, the delays. But when it was all said and done, the Phillies won 3 out of 4 as the Brewers lost 3 of 4 to the Marlins, a crucial result in that series out in Milwaukee. And so the Phillies open this final series in Houston needing to just win 1 game or have the Brewers lose 1 game. They're in pretty good shape. They didn't want to go to Houston needing to, win 2 out of 3, for example, against an 104-win team.
Right. Yeah, it was a very productive weekend for the Phillies. And there was a lot of worry about the weather, and in the end, they got the 4 games in, and that was the most, very important thing. The most important thing was they go out and win that series, and they did. Took 3 of 4, and they got some help from their old nemesis, the Miami Marlins. They win 3 of 4. The 3 wins against the Brewers all come late, and 2 of those late wins, Phillies players in the clubhouse after their game, watching on the TV and watching on their phones the action unfold in Milwaukee, and they were quite happy as the Marlins were rallying for a couple victories there to lower their magic number over the Brewers. You mentioned the weekend felt like it lasted a month. I asked that very question to JT Realmuto after yesterday's game, and he agreed. He said it was the longest weekend of baseball he's ever experienced. The delays were long. There was, a double header. And sat around waiting for the weather to clear, and eventually it did. So it was crucial that they got the series in. They also got that series in down in Atlanta. There was talk of moving that series, at least from fans. Why don't you move that series? Why don't you move the Phillies series? In the end, Major League Baseball and the host teams got their weather reports, and the Nationals made a good call to play 2 on Saturday. There were enough pockets to get those games in, and it wasn't too bad. Sunday it was difficult, but it didn't really start getting bad out there until about the 5th inning, and by that time the game was official. The Phillies got it in, so it was important they got those 4 games in. They don't have to go back to Washington and make one up on Thursday. And important they won 3 of them, and important they got that game in Sunday because Zach Wheeler was able to pitch, able to get his pitch count to 77. And if he had not been able to pitch, he would have had to pitch tonight, Monday night in Houston. And that would have eliminated him as a candidate to pitch the Game 1 opener in the postseason if they get there. By getting him on the mound yesterday, getting him to 77 pitches, and he looked very good. He lines up to pitch Friday in what may be this team's first postseason game since 2011, if they can take that magic number of 1 and reduce it to 0 with a victory over the Astros here in Houston sometime in the next 3 days, maybe tonight, or with a Brewers loss against Arizona. But, the Phillies want to win. They don't want to back in. They want to go in the front door, and they'll be looking at Aaron Nola tonight to do that.
Jim, just talking about how long the weekend was and how much rain there was, the field conditions, do you think that that's going to wear on the Phillies heading into this week? Because there's only the 1 day off between this Houston series and the beginning of a playoff series, which would be 3 days in a row in that first round. I ask because, Kyle Schwarber, for example, looked like he was dinged up a little bit in one of the games after sliding into home, looked like a leg. Certainly there weren't ideal conditions to be standing out there in 55-degree weather, rainy weather for 4 straight days.
I can pretty safely say almost everybody is a little dinged up after 159 games, 160 games. Schwarber did ding up that knee on that to me, it was an ill-advised double steal. And it wasn't one that Rob Thompson called. It was one that Schwarber and Bryce Harper executed, and it worked. And it got him an early run, but I just think it was very risky with maybe the slowest runner on the team. Already had a leg injury this year and then limped off when he banged his knee and ended up getting a lot of treatment over the weekend. But he swung it really well over the weekend. Schwarber looked like he was starting to use that bat head again and really drive the ball. Had a bases-clearing base hit in Sunday's game and a couple home runs on Saturday, which was big. So a lot of guys are dinged up, but I really think when you see that number 1 in terms of the magic number, and I really think when you see the possibility of the postseason beginning or getting there on Friday, I just think all that adrenaline kind of washes away all the nicks and bruises, and it makes you feel better. It's like a reserve tank kicks in. So I don't think it's a problem. Like I said, a lot of guys are banged up, but they can get through it. I mean, they're tired. Everybody's tired at this time of year. I mean, I think the last couple of weeks, Bryson Stott has looked like he's been tired a little bit, and it's understandable. He's never played this long in his life. But I tell you what, he really kicked it in over the weekend. Played a lot better defensively. Had a huge hit in Sunday's game. So maybe there was that final push of adrenaline kicking in. And it needs to kick in because, this is what you play for, to have a chance to get in the postseason. And they have a chance, and it's a good chance. Hasn't been a great September. They're not a perfect team. They have flaws, but, hey, a lot of teams have flaws. They have a chance to get in. They need to cash it in and see what happens in the tournament. Their pitching lines up just the way they had hoped it would, just the way they designed it with Wheeler and Nola. And, I think we both know how good those two guys can be on any given night. And, I'll tell you what, if I was a favored team, I would not want to be facing those two guys, knowing what the possibility is and knowing the possibility that they could go out there and really dial one up over 7 innings and really tie some bats and knots. They're both very good pitchers, both very good, very capable of doing any big things on any given night. So things are lining up okay for the Phillies after a tough month of September. Things have really turned the corner and are looking good.
If the Phillies end up playing the Cardinals, you'd think that game 1 would probably be Zach Wheeler versus Adam Wainwright. And you have Aaron Nola also lined up to pitch in the first 2 games of that series. The reason I bring this up is because if you look at the top of the Cardinals rotation, like a Wainwright, a Jordan Montgomery, a Miles Michaelis, the Cardinals are just, without question, in my opinion, a better matchup for the Phillies than the Mets. And this is relevant because the Phillies are only a game behind the Padres now for the second wild card spot. And they have the tiebreaker over San Diego. The Phillies could very easily, they might finish the job tonight, get the magic number down to 0. They might also move ahead of the Padres in these 3 games against the Astros. And if so, they're going to face the Mets because the Braves just swept the Mets over the weekend in what was essentially a playoff series for those 2 teams. Atlanta wins the NL East. The Mets' only path to winning the NL East at this point is doing what the Brewers need to do to the Phillies. They need to go 3-0 as Atlanta goes 0-3. There's a big difference between getting like a Wainwright and a Jordan Montgomery versus getting DeGrom and Scherzer in games 1 and 2 of a playoff series. And because those guys started Friday and Saturday, their regular rest would line them up to pitch the first 2 games of that series. So beyond looking at the scoreboard in Milwaukee, it's worth looking at the scoreboard in San Diego this week as well.
Yeah, a lot of action. A lot of excitement, a lot of balls in the air, a lot of implications. Hey, look, lining up to face the Mets in the first round of the playoffs in your first playoff series in a decade would not be ideal. The Mets, what's the Mets record against the Phillies? The Phillies have won 5. I think it was 14-5.
Yeah, Mets went 14-5. Yep.
So the Mets won 14 out of 19. Phillies had a tough time with the Mets all year. They didn't match up with them, and they lost some late games, some heartbreakers, some games they absolutely got pounded in. The Mets, they just took it to another level against the Phillies, but they took it to another level against a lot of teams this year. Phillies matched up with them a lot early when they weren't a very good team, when they were kicking the ball around, when their bullpen was blowing leads, when their offense had not gotten started yet. I think the Phillies are a different team since they played the bulk of their games with the Mets. That said, I think the Mets still, on paper, are a superior club and could cause the Phillies a lot of problems. But like I said, Wheeler and Nola, they can beat anybody. And this offense, if it gets hot, can beat anybody. So you just have to, whoever you play, you just have to go out there and lay it on the line. And you just never know. I mean, Kyle Schwarber talked about this a few weeks ago when he was with the Cubs in 2015. They went 7-0 against the Mets, and then the Mets swept them in the NLCS and went to the World Series. Big turnaround in the postseason. Back in 1983, the Phillies went 11-1. The Phillies were 1-11. I'm sorry, 1-11 against the Dodgers that regular season. So the Dodgers went 11-1 against the Phillies, and then after going, struggling against the Dodgers all season in '83, going 1-11, the Phillies beat the Dodgers in the NLCS. So if your great players go out and play great, you can turn the tables on a team. And that means Wheeler would have to pitch really well. That means Nola would have to pitch really well. And that means the big guns in the lineup. Harper would have to come alive. Real Muto would have to continue playing like he has played really since the end of June, which is outstanding. Schwarber would have to go on one of his tears. Hoskins would have to go on one of his tears. Streaky guys. They'd have to get something from Nick Castellanos. Alec Bohm would have to play. They'd have to just play well all around, and then you can go out and beat anybody. But your point is well taken. The Cardinals are a better matchup. And maybe there's something poetic about that matchup. I mean, you think back to 2011, Phillies win 102 games. They have that great team, and they're a quick out by the Cardinals, who got red hot around August 25th and just rode it right through. So the Phillies have not played a postseason game since they played the Cardinals that night when Doc Halladay, was never the same after that game. Ryan Howard blew out his Achilles. Halladay left it all on the mound that night. So maybe it would be a little poetic to see the Phillies play that Cardinals team. And it would be, but still, even though they're not the Mets, they're a tough ball club. They got two guys in that lineup who are just thunderous, and Arenado and Goldschmidt. But I don't think their starting pitching is explosive as the Mets, so it might be a better matchup for the Phillies. But whoever they play, they need to go out and play well, and they can't beat themselves. I mean, defense has been improved probably through the meat of this season, but early and recently been a problem for the Phillies. I mean, I can think of the last handful of nights. I mean, there was that game in Chicago. Nola was on the mound. They didn't turn a double play. It cost them 3 runs. Brendan Marsh, in the last handful of days, loses 2 balls in the sun, cost them a combined 3 runs. They didn't make 2 plays in the infield on Saturday, and that cost them 5 runs. So defense can still be an Achilles heel for this team. They need to play well these next 3 nights to lock down this playoff berth, and then beyond if they do what we think they're going to do.
We talk a lot more about the Cardinals if the Phillies get to the playoffs and end up facing them, but just something to note is, talking about how their strength is the Goldschmidt-Arenado duo. Those two have slumped in September. Goldschmidt and Arenado both hitting below 235 this month. OPS is below 700. There's a lot of other guys that can beat you in that lineup. But, I mean, if you're just weighing things and, the DeGrom, Scherzer, Bassett aspect of the Mets and the fact that some of the Cardinals' key hitters are going cold here at the wrong time, it just seems like the Cardinals would be a better matchup for the Phillies. But first, there's this series in Houston, and the Phillies are going to face some very difficult starting pitching in Lance McCullers, Justin Verlander, and Framber Valdez. A couple ways to look at this. On the one hand, it's not who you want to face if you're trying to clinch a playoff berth. But on the other hand, it's probably better to face high-level pitching going into the playoffs than to face Eric Fedde and Patrick Corbin, in your final couple games of the season, because you're not going to see starting pitching like that in the month of October. Whether those guys go deep, McCullers, Verlander, and Valdez, 2 times through the lineup, potentially 2.5 times through the lineup, it's going to be tricky for the Phillies offense.
No question. I hear people say, "Oh, they're going to pull them out early." So what? Suppose they only go 5, right? That's a good chunk of the game. You got to face that quality pitching, so it's going to be tough to get them early. Um, I mean, you're right about these are going to be difficult pitchers for the Phillies to face, no matter how long they stay in the lineup. But if you want to be good, you got to test yourself against greatness, and they're facing 3 really good ones. And I mean, Justin Verlander, amazing at age 39, he's leading the majors in ERA and WHIP. Looks like he's never missed a beat after the elbow injury, and kind of ageless. And he's going to be a tough one. He's going to be out there laying it on the line because he's pitching for a Cy Young award. So that's a tough assignment, and that's a good team. I mean, they got a lot. Look at their lineup. They got a lot of power. Bullpen has been good. So these are the type of teams you're going to see in the postseason. Why not get a good look at one and try to build a little confidence over the last few days?
In terms of the Phillies rotation, they'd have Nola and Wheeler going in the first 2 games of a playoff series. At this point, it seems like it would be Ranger Suarez in game 3, just based on how guys have pitched lately. Suarez has a 2.58 ERA over his last 15 starts. Meanwhile, Kyle Gibson has really struggled. His ERA for the season is now pushed over 5. Do you think it would be Suarez, or could the Phillies, and we talked about this last week, potentially maybe going with a right-handed opener, just based on the Cardinals being so right-handed if they get there? But then again, Suarez has just pitched so well lately. It's kind of flown under the radar.
I think it would be Suarez. That would be my guess. I don't know if they would go with an opener, but you're right. Gibson has really struggled, giving up a lot of hits, giving up a lot of runs. I really think Suarez is the guy. It looks like he's hitting his stride here late in the season after those back spasms he had, maybe August or early August. He's looked really good recently, and he's looked confident. He'd be the guy I'd go with, and I think he'll be the guy Rob Thompson will go with, unless they do something funky like an opener. And in that case, if they're going to go with a right-handed opener, I would go with Zach Eflin, right?
Yeah, Eflin's looked really solid in his short role here as like a 1 or 2 inning guy. It's been pretty impressive. Eflin
that would allow you, because Eflin, he's a starter by nature, and it would allow him to go through a starter's warm up routine. Get to the park, get your stretching, get your heat, do your long toss, and do your running, and get to the bullpen just like you were going to start a game, and maybe try to ride him a few innings, and then bring in Suarez. If that, I don't know. Again, I don't know if that's their plan, but if their blueprint involved an opener, that might be an interesting way to go.
Jim, do you think it would be difficult for these guys who have been waiting for the playoffs for such a long time, like a Real Muto, a Segura, even a Rhys Hoskins and a Nola? Do you think it would be difficult for those guys to just like keep their emotions in check? It's probably easier said than done, right? Like everybody's going to say, oh, you got to take it one day at a time and all that. But when you've been waiting your entire career for this moment and it's here, it seems like it's human nature to get like overly amped up for it.
Well, I mean, it's something you should be excited for. Emotion is good. It can, if you use it the right way. If emotion, if you get tight because of the moment, that's not a good thing. And I think we've seen this team get tight at times in September, evidenced by a handful of nights when they've had a slew of base runners and not been able to get anybody in. So I have seen some tightness down the stretch. You have to keep that out of your playbook and keep that out of your mind. But, emotion and energy used the right way can be quite valuable, I think. I think early runs are so important to a ball club because it can bring a lot of that out. It can relax everybody, and you're not pressing after that. And your pitcher, it just makes everybody a little more comfortable. So, they need to score early runs. They need to get on base and get those guys in. And then I think you'll build a lot of positive energy, and that's what emotional will do you a lot of good. I mean, I've spoken to Hoskins, I've spoken to Nola, spoken to Eflin about this, and they've all been here a long time, and they've never been to the postseason, and for much of their careers here, they've played on losing teams. I mean, Hoskins, will flat out tell you it would mean the world to him to get into the postseason. So I just think they have to use that as the motivation to get there, and they're really, really close. So if they're going to get overly emotional, and too excited, or too amped up, or too tight, then they don't belong there. You need to. These are the most. This has been the most important game still play as Phillies, and they're a game up, and they need to finish it off.
Celebration could come as soon as tonight in Houston. It's not all wrapped up, but the Phillies are as close as it gets without having officially clinched. I'll let you get over the ballpark there in Houston, Jim. Game's going to be underway here in a couple hours. Thanks a lot for listening to the Phillies Talk podcast. We'll catch you later in the week, hopefully with some really good news pertaining to the playoffs.